Good to be here with you all today. I'm going to take you for a bit of a story as to my background and entrepreneurial journey within STEM. And before I really get into that, I just wanted to share with you something that, does this work? There we go. Something that has really I heard when I was a young child, something that really keeps me going when things get really hard, because they do, and really motivates me and my team. It's a quote by Margaret Mead: never doubt that a small group of committed and thoughtful citizens can change the world, because indeed they are the only ones that ever have. And as I tell you about the kinds of things that we do and what we've accomplished in a reasonably short amount of time, you'll hopefully see that it's true for ordinary people like you and I to actually go out there and do something really impactful and meaningful with your own resource, which is yourself and your attitude and energy that you bring with you. So this is where I grew up, around 700 kilometres away on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, around 50 k's outside of Grafton, if anyone knows that area, kind of between Coffs Harbour and Byron Bay. And so I grew up on a big 100-acre property where we have a farm, and our farm is growing eucalyptus trees. So not a lot of farming actually happens, more so watching trees grow. So behind that fog is a bunch of eucalyptus trees, half of which have just been logged. Not that we have telegraph poles anymore, so I don't know what they're going to be used for anymore, but we'll see. And we're ready for the next lot to come through and start our new forest. But so this property, whilst Grafton isn't like a super remote regional town, my parents are hippie dippies and made a point of making sure that we grew up as if we were super regional and remote. So I grew up with no power. We had a diesel generator. I grew up with no water. We still have no water. We excavated out a dam. We have a big rain tank. When it doesn't rain, we have no water. We have to go to friends' houses for showers. That was our life. We had no postal service. We just got internet this year. My parents just discovered YouTube and the world that brings. I think we're the only people in the country that are supportive of the NBN, because it's literally turned my family's life around. My parents can now communicate with their grandchildren via Skype instead of travelling 3 hours to Brisbane. It's changed our lives. But we really didn't have anything there. Like, there was nothing. Like, I was a barefoot bush kid making mud pies because that was the only thing available to me. The other thing that was available to me was a really beautiful night sky. And I loved it. And I begged Santa Claus for my first telescope when I was 8. I had no idea how to use it. All I knew is I wanted to be closer to what was up there, and I just wanted to be part of it. And that kind of followed me through life. I had all these other interests along the way. I wasn't like this crazy, NASA kid like I am today, but it was something that I loved all the way through. And so I was around 14 years old when I decided I was going to commit to it, and I was going to be an aerospace engineer, and I was going to work for NASA. Which meant I had to pick my subjects, figure out what my ATAR goal needed to be, and I started working towards that from age 14 because, funnily enough, NASA requires you to do well. So I had to do that, and I had to plan for it. So that goal kind of is what got me through school. I didn't really like school. It was really hard for my teachers to keep me in class, but the way that they did that was the carrot on the end of the stick being NASA. And so that got me in class. I did very well. I moved 700 kilometres away from home to attend university here in Randwick. I went to UNSW. Maybe a bit of a faux pas since we're at UCID, but that's where I went. And I studied aerospace engineering and a Bachelor's of Mathematics as well. And so during that time, I realised that working at NASA was going to be an extraordinarily difficult task. I had, at that point, fallen in love with an Australian man who I saw that myself being with for the rest of my life. We're engaged now, so we're going down that right path. But that basically meant that NASA wasn't an option because Australians can't work at NASA unless you're an American citizen, which means you have to marry an American. Or like win that lottery card that, like, you know, 1 in 20 or something. And then you have a limited amount of time to work with that. So NASA was really going to be a hard one to pull off. And I really, really, really wanted to work in space. You know, it was something that I obviously had been personally motivated by for a very long time. And I needed some way of doing that. And through a whole bunch of series of different things, I ended up founding Cuberider, which basically means that I can bring space and access to space down into the classroom and give lots more students around the country the opportunity that I wish I'd gotten, which was to have my very own space mission. So we created, I had to turn from an engineer and a mathematician into kind of like a business smarts person, plus lawyer, plus educator. And we created a full education program. Have run 2 space missions to the International Space Station with around 2,000 Aussie high school students involved in both of those combined. So that's kind of what we do. The whole idea is to just show you what you can achieve when you're given the right platform and the right support. And if you can achieve a space mission when you're in school, what are you going to do next? Like, that's where we're setting the bar for you. And so that's the whole idea around Cuberider. And basically, if space can get me through school and doing engineering, then it should work for someone else too. The only thing that's really kind of as cool is dinosaurs, but they kind of lost their shine when I was about this big. They're no longer cool for me. So this is a picture of our first rocket launch. And I want to because I want to be brutally honest with you all, that the entrepreneurial journey is bloody hard. And it comes with hurdle upon hurdle. And to say that we had this nice coasty journey would be an utter lie. So firstly, I had to become not an engineer, which we applied to the Telstra-backed Startup Accelerator, which is a 6-month program. And that taught us to be a bit more savvy and not just technical people. And then, so that was the one step in our journey, which I think was a really pivotal point because it really expanded our skill sets and our perspectives on what the kind of opportunities were to bring this to a larger audience. But then we also had these other hurdles. And I'm going to go through those a little bit more because I don't want to scare you all. It's very rewarding being an entrepreneur. And I know that's what this conference is all about, but there are significant hurdles that you have to go through. And the payoff, just like any STEM project, is when you get through all those hurdles to the end bit and it all works out. So entrepreneurship, I liken very much to a large-scale STEM project where it's actually anything but easy, and you're just in it for the payoff at the end for when it works and succeeds. If any of you, do any of you code or have spent a day coding or done a coding project? Most of you? Yeah, it's boring. Yeah, you spend most of your time trying to find what you've done wrong and just debugging your entire thing. Yeah, entrepreneurship's much the same, but you get that rush and that sense of glory at the end when it finally magically works somehow and all your hard work pays off. So in order to achieve this rocket launch, this was on December 9th last year in Japan, we had to become Australia's very first partner with the International Space Station. So no one had done this before in Australia. Didn't exist, the legal framework wasn't there. Most people didn't take us seriously. We were never going to achieve this. People had been trying for decades before to do things in space, and it just wasn't possible with our current legal framework. rule number 1 of entrepreneurship, persistence. We took on that battle, and we broke it down into steps, and we were a 2-person team with 2 22-year-old undergraduate dropout engineers at that time. I still haven't kind of gotten my degree yet, but that's another story. Best role model. So we were 2 22-year-old undergraduate dropout engineers. 0 legal training, and we basically worked with the government to rewrite the Australian federal policy. We took what was meant to take a full legal team 18 months to a single person in 6 months, created a cookie cutter process for anyone else to go on and follow, and contributed a hefty portion of the new federal space policy, which is just yet to be passed, but is getting reviewed as we speak. Which means that it's a lot easier for everyone else now to go do it, but what it meant for us was they basically put a blindfold on us, dropped us into a dark room, and made us find the hoops before we could jump through it. To say that that was a hard task is an understatement. We also then had to do international agreement negotiation. So Australia has signed the UN Space Treaty. All of the countries involved in the International Space Station, we had to get approval by 16 countries and their governments to send something up there. But they have their own international agreement. And so one of the most poignant points of the entire process for me was sitting on a teleconference with Washington, DC lawyers and Canberra lawyers, figuring out and negotiating how those 2 international agreements were going to work together to allow my students to run their code in space. It is the very definition of out of depth. It was a nightmare. But I've got a de facto international law degree now, so it's fine. I can do almost anything. We pulled that off, and so now there is a clear pathway and a gateway for future Australian collaboration. And legally now, there's a way for you to do that. If any of you want to go off and do your own space missions to the ISS. And then the next hurdle that we had to come across to make this mission come true was the fact that we don't have clearance for any of the engineering documents that we needed to design for. We're not American citizens, you need military level clearance. We don't have that because we're Australian, so we don't get to have the most up-to-date engineering drawings that we have to design for. Which means we basically have to guess on what all of the dimensions are. And so we did, because we had no choice. We guessed, and we found some documents on the internet that are about a decade old, and we were like, I can't update things that regularly on the space station. Because that's the best we could get, right? So just take what you can get, and we did that. And so we designed everything off. We had our rocket be delayed 6 months. SpaceX had a huge explosion in 2016. They blew up $10 million worth of Facebook satellites, $250 million worth of Israeli communications satellites. Pretty sure that company went under and then sued SpaceX. It was a huge catastrophe. Our thing wasn't on there, don't worry. But what they did do was damage the launch pad we were meant to be on, which basically meant everything was delayed. And because we need to launch within the Australian school year, that wasn't going to work for us. So then we had to pull out a few more cards out of the hat, and at the 11th hour, we got our payload taken off the SpaceX rocket, transported through to Japan, put on a Japanese rocket, and launched from Japan. Yeah, that was mission number 1. And that rocket took off on time. It was an amazing moment. I've ugly cried at that moment. It was not pretty. It was a lot of people's hard work to get to that point. So then we get up there onto the space station, and turns out the dimensions had changed in that decade. And we couldn't fit into the structure and connect to the onto the USB, which we needed to connect to get power and communications. And it took us about a month to find a USB connection that would allow us to fit and work on the station. But then it all worked. After that, it all worked. But there was a lot of hoops to jump through. And then now we've had a second mission, which was much more smooth, and none of that happened, and it launched on time, and that was fantastic. We finally got to go on a SpaceX rocket, and that was in August this year, which is a dream come true. Has anyone here not heard of Elon Musk? Okay, wonderful. A couple of people. You need to look this guy up. The high schoolers in this room are going to be the first generation to be Martians, and he's one of the people that's making that happen. His timelines for sending first humans to Mars is 2024, which has come forward. He's ahead of NASA and ESA, who are in the 2030s for their timelines for sending humans to Mars. You should look him up. He also does like cars and stuff. You know, other stuff which is nowhere near as cool as rockets that land on their feet. So this is, I don't know if this video will work. Slides are always, no, it's not going to work. But basically that's our little box inside the space station getting installed for the first time. But as I told you, it took us a month to get the astronauts to find a good setup so that we could actually fit. So there was many more times after this that they had to interact with it. Am I okay for time? 2 minutes? Okay, all right. I might not go through all the different experiments that people do. I'm happy to talk to you about that if you want to hear what the kids have actually done, because that's probably the most exciting thing about the program is, you know, what the students actually choose to do, because they have full creative freedom over that. But hopefully, I just wanted to kind of share with you the kind of journey that we've gone on. Hopefully show you that Margaret Mead quote can happen. We've done all this with a 3-person team. No government grants or assistance. All of this has been done. Schools were our original backers. Schools paid to be part of the program and trusted these 2 22-year-olds that they were going to send something to space. And it's really their belief that we were going to be able to do that. That meant that the whole program took off. But hopefully you've gotten a bit of an idea of, I don't know, what's possible if you set your mind to it. Thank you.
I think I do this every time I pick up the microphone. Do we have any questions?
No, it's okay. I just want to know what's the coolest student experiment that you've run?
A lot of the coolest experiments are about what they do with the data once it gets back on Earth. So one year, like the first year, we had a group of students who wanted to see if they could test time dilation. These were Year 8 students, which meant that they learnt all about relativity about 4 years early in order to do that. And this year we noticed a trend of really heavily focusing on data and doing some really amazing and outstanding things with data. So we had a group of students from the Hunter Valley Grammar, who created and coded a virtual reality game, and it's a simulator for inside the International Space Station with all of the environmental data that they collected in space that allows, you know, astronauts or space tourists to train for life inside the space station and get used to that zero-G environment and moving around and moving objects and things like that, which is, I thought that was super cool. One of the photos up there was of Lucy Turnbull having a go at it, and it's really just a blast, right? Because you're not used to working in that zero-G environment. But we had a group of students. My bag's not in here. We had a group of girls from Surdon College here in Sydney. They were interested in the atmospheric effects inside the space station on the astronaut's skin. And they worked with a pharmacist and a dermatologist, and they created an actual moisturizer specific for the astronaut environment. And it's a physical thing, which, you know, they could go off and commercialize now if they wanted to. We've had so many cool experiments happen, but that's really outstanding. They're two really outstanding ones that were part of our showcase this year that our industry got to see. Yeah. Did anyone have any questions?
I'm going to ask this as a bit of a loaded question because everyone's going to have to do a marketing exercise around this. I just wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on what's involved in the classroom for the students that do undertake the Cuberider program. Yeah, sure. So we're a project-based learning program, basically, that makes it, that gives you a bit of structure and a bit of higher order purpose, a bit of a why as to why you would go ahead and do the project, which is to have your own space mission, duh. And so students do a whole bunch of different things. We survey industry every year to figure out what skill sets they need. Hard skills that are the core focus are coding and data analysis. Obviously, there's a lot of push towards data analysis. We're not a learn to code program. We use coding as a tool. There's a bit of a distinction there. And we have a big focus on the soft skills, which are actually the hardest skills, so I don't know why they're called soft skills. So things like teamwork, critical thinking. A lot of student groups actually get it wrong, and so it's about figuring out why it was wrong. What could you have done better? What's the next data set that you would like to collect? How would you do things differently? Lots of those kinds of really soft skills. Communication, you do all kinds of different things in terms of communication, from an actual scientific report to logbook entries, because we're training you for industry, to infographics and videos, and I think there's an activity in there where you can even make a rap song if you want to make a rap song. But all kinds of really different forms of communication. Yeah.
I assume that the payload is costed by NAS. Are schools funding that completely, and are students taking the mass of their payload into account when they're designing their experiments?
So it's a great question. So yeah, most things that get sent to space are paid for by weight, by kilogram. The word Cuberider, the name comes from. The cube is obviously, we have a cube formation. It's a play on the standard satellite CubeSat. And the rider is from ride sharing. We're all ride sharing and working together to get to space. We're all sharing the costs of that. So yes, it's completely funded by schools participating. And the difference is, so you're using hardware. So we've got a sensor suite approved by NASA to be space-worthy. And we've got that in space, and you're using a replica of that in the classroom. So you're developing a software experiment for those sensors on your replica, and then you submit your hardware to us. We have to security screen it because we'd be in an awful lot of trouble if you try and hack into the space station. It gets security screened again in Houston by our partners that work very closely with NASA over there, and then it gets uploaded. So it's only your software that gets uploaded, and then we download the data for you in a reasonable amount of time. Any other questions? We're good? Wonderful.
Do you have any more questions? Please, thanks, Lynn. Oh, sorry, one last question.
Oh, sorry. Just with like the whole process of all of it all. How long does that usually take, and what are the steps involved?
Do you mean of the education program, or do you mean of running a
so
space
just like
mission.
getting an idea from a school and getting that project up into space. Or something.
So we normally have, we've had one launch per year. And so you basically, if you want to have your thing on the rocket, your code on the rocket, then you submit. It's about a month out from launch date. Otherwise, we can upload your code later, so it doesn't really matter. Minimum commitment is a 25-hour commitment, and we basically have a conversation to make sure that you're doing this for the right reasons and prepared for, you know, the hurdles and the journey that is having a space mission. So it's not the easiest program you can do. It's definitely a challenge. Different schools and students are challenged in different ways. And we want to make sure that you're prepared for that and you're going to see it through to the end before we bring you onto the program. So there's a bit of making sure that everyone's aligned at the start, and that's generally just a conversation with your teacher and who's going to be leading the program in the school. And then we talk about how it's going to be implemented within that. And then 25 hours minimum. If you can do it over 2-term elective for 50 hours, that's even better. And yeah, we're just, depending on when the rocket launches, that's when you get your data. Awesome. I think that's
Cool.
it.
Excellent. Great.